And it's six here, back again. We have another a full house of CCIEs ready to discuss uh, DevNet and so forth. But one of the questions I've seen online that comes up periodically is, what did you do to study? So, I want to make sure that the guys, share exactly what they do to study, especially now since, the DevNet certifications are right around the corner. Guys, what do you do to study? Let's start with you, Darren. What do you do to study?
Oh gosh. Well, I suppose for all of us, right, the CCIE and getting those certifications is only really the starting point, right? So for me, it was a case of get that far and realize just how much you didn't know. So it's a way of life, right? You study and you just keep on studying and studying. As you can see, all the junk behind me here on the bookcases. I'm a reader, and so I read, and it's not just the Cisco stuff, but it's the anything else. What I tend to do is I'll read all the time. I'll always have books on the go. But if I'm seriously studying, if I've got a goal for a cert or something like that, it's you get the structured plan together based on whatever the syllabus is for that cert, and find the materials, and then I have to write it. Right, this is just peculiar to me, I suppose, but I always work best with a pen in my hand and either a book or my Surface in front of me, and I'm making notes. So it's all about read, take notes, read, take notes, read, take notes, and then go back through those notes and take more notes and summarize and summarize and summarize until I've got to the point where I get it inside and out. And that can take 2-3 iterations of note taking and summarizing to get to that. Which is why it takes me forever to do study for an exam. That's just how it is for me, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's been interesting doing. I've been doing some of the cloud certs, so AWS, Azure certs in particular, and a lot of the materials for that are video based, and I guess it'll be the same for the DevNet certs as we move into those. And they're a little trickier because you've not got the same sort of opportunity to take notes. You have to speed the videos up if you want to go through bits that you already know, and then you have to slow them down to make sure that you've got time to take notes and that sort of thing. But there's still very much a case of, if the information flows through my hand and a pen onto some form of either paper or electronic capture, then it goes in. Unless I do that, it doesn't go in. So I don't know what you guys are like, but that's kind of where I end up. That's why it takes me so long. But, yeah, I mean, I see some nods around here, but I don't know how many people feel the same.
Now, that's very similar. I mean, if you go back through how, probably last 20 years, I probably started off like you did. Obviously it was great to study from books, and it depends on, I don't want to say the buzzword or what's out in the industry, right? You go grab a book and you sit there and you highlight and you go and take notes and so forth. But somewhere along the way, maybe because I wrote a book and maybe because I was in the.
Oh, not again. You've written a book. Will someone buy that flaming book?
What was the title again?
Maybe
He had to slip it in there, didn't he?
well, or maybe it makes well. Let me tell you why I put it out in there, right? Because I've done the CCI blueprints as well, right? And when you go through the exercise of both, for example, let's say a certification book, you're actually taking that blueprint and you're actually trying to come up with ways, filler, right, to explain and get your point across. Well, we've been doing this a while, so I can look at a blueprint and say, look, this is what I need to know. So I've gotten more efficient, where most of my studying has to be, I'll take something from the blueprint that, a technology I'm looking at, maybe cloud or maybe data center, something from that blueprint, and actually spend time, looking and making sure I become familiar and understand that particular line item. And that's efficient for me, so I had gone to the days where I spent a long time reading a whole book or looking at a whole video. I actually spend time looking through a video to see that specific item that I need to learn, and I move on. So,
mean, I guess.
Go
on, Rick. Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say. I mean, I think the other thing that's kind of changed, right, is when you first started studying and got those first certs, there was that one book that followed the blueprint, and that's what you would, you read cover to cover, right, and then that got you close to that because all that information for that certification was contained in that one thing, right? Now the information is so separated, right? Like when I study for like something for like the DevNet, or I mean, there's like 50 different sources that you go and look at, right? And so what's worked for me learning in the past is like I've got to the point where I can't sit down and just read through. I want to find what I'm looking for to answer my question and what I'm studying. Kind of what you were saying, Derek, is like you pick that piece of the blueprint and I'm studying for that. I'll go read that section or figure out what I need to know out of there. I mean, one of the things that helped me the most studying for my data center lab was just taking a dcloud lab environment, like for FlexPod or whatever, that had the equipment I needed. Like I used the Fabric Path lab to do OTV, right? Because it had the hardware and there wasn't really an OTV lab. So I, kind of used that to kind of work through and use that to kind of learn.
You can also try to.
Sorry, Rick, for a second there, Rick. And you hit on something that I think plays a part with the transition of learning, right? Gone are the times where, let's say, you're looking for OTV or maybe a Nexus, learning a Nexus technology. It's not the same because that alone does not really help you. You have to layer approach where now you're looking at maybe OTV and maybe look at OTV and what's going across OTV. Maybe it's a little ACI component, or maybe it's we move up layers like Kubernetes or VM hypervisor. So it's technology is a lot more complex nowadays. So it takes efficiency to be able to keep on top of all those different topics to learn, because you learning Nexus or OTV by itself is really not learning that technology. I think that 20 years ago, you could know RIP, EIGRP, or whatever, EIGRP and BGP, but that's all isolated, right? Now you're talking about layered technologies, which you have to be efficient. Sorry about that, Wolfie. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think one of the best things you can do is you find someone who learns the same stuff and try to explain it to him. Because for me, the best way to really make sure that I completely understood something is if I have to explain it to someone else. So don't do everything on your own. Find some people who want to learn the same stuff, do it together, or go for a learning group, which is also available, let's say, on Learning Network, and try to explain the stuff as much as you can.
That's a good shout. The study group approach is really important. I think in certain qualifications as well, certain certifications works really, really well. I know my favorite cert, the CCDE, the study group plays a huge part in that. No, it does though, because it's much of it is about that reasoning and about that being able to explain why you make sort of choices. Well, that's great in isolation, but if you're actually there explaining it to someone else, as you say, it's just having someone to bounce the ideas from and to disagree with you. That's a really, really valid approach, I think. But I guess one of the things you mentioned, Rick, about the books being a kind of almost outdated approach to study. I think you're right. I think that there are very few books that you would read end to end these days, because things get changed and updated so quickly, right? So staying on top of that, and particularly with stuff like the DevNet certs, that's going to be a case of, the book isn't going to exist, is it really? It's about taking those topics and going and hunting them down, because they're so wide and varied. But I suppose, written versus lab, completely different types of scenarios as well. I don't know that many people, for example, who certainly back in the day, who would have lab stuff in order to do the written exam, and yet now it seems to be a thing that the whole, you think of the whole lab every day thing and whatever that people do. Labbing seems to be a really, really key part of whatever study you're taking on from a technical perspective. Like Derek said about understanding all of the different technologies you're playing with. What better way to do it than to actually sit and work with it?
Getting yourself a lab is much easier today than it was in the past, huh?
That's true. That is true.
Absolutely.
Remember
Yeah.
20 years ago when you wanted to do CCIE, you had to buy real hardware. You had to spend several $1,000s maybe to buy yourself the lab, and later, or you could buy a used one from someone who has just certified, and then he sold a, let's say, half a dozen routers.
Well,
That's what I did. I
On
bought a
eBay.
voice lab on eBay after I failed my
Yeah.
first attempt.
Yes.
Same thing here as well. Yeah.
Mine was a little bit later than some of yours, I think, and I ended up having to virtualize a few routers here and there to try and make it look like a lab. I didn't ever have everything, and I think a lot of it was doing that actually helped me in a lot of ways because it made me understand things like VRFs and whatever better. But you're right. I mean, it's vital for certain things.
Well, and I think there's something to be said for that duct tape and baling wire of building your own lab, right? And having to like do things different. That's part of the learning experience, right? And ingraining that stuff. I mean, when I was doing my voice lab, Call Manager was not virtualized at that time, right? So we had, and it wasn't supported in a production. So I was running in a VM, right? So there was like little forums out there of how you got to do like registry hacks to get it to run on a virtual host and all this other stuff, right? So that's part of the process, I think, right? And the similar way today is with when it comes to the DevNet and the coding, you're not writing a lot of like lines of code. You're going to take bits and pieces from here, bits and pieces from here, and stitch them all together to do whatever task you want. And so I personally don't always look at every line of the code that I'm using for something. And so that's what I'm having to do is go back and learn like, all right, this is the exact Python syntax, right? Or whatever it is.
Right. Well, let me hit on what you just said, because what you just spoke about shows the transition of technology and how you prepare. And I actually think that having physical equipment is a lot easier than complete virtualization, because now whole networks are completely virtualized, right? Even, and I think a few of you spoke about cloud concepts. All cloud concepts are completely virtualized. Different terminology, different ways to visualize, different ways to do it. And I think that's what adds to a lot of, so labbing now, you sit there and you think, well, back in the day, I used to be able to put up a, either sign into a virtual, not virtual lab, but a VPN lab, or have my physical lab here and what have you, and break it down and set it up. It's always kind of ready. Now you're using, cloud technologies, AWS, GCP, what have you, trying to come up with, and the complexity of trying to get that environment right and configured, it's a little bit difficult. It's a different frame of mind than it was back in the day. So I think that transition, makes it a little bit more complex to study, now. So
that said, there's a lot of
You have
support.
to learn a lot more things in order to get it to work, right? But, one thing that, is interesting now with this kind of lab every day thing, I mean, I personally, labbing is a very important tool. It's not the be-all, end-all to learning something, because all you learn by is the do part. You don't get the why part, and the why and the how are, they're equally important. But what I think is missing from a lot of people in the community today is the why. Why do I do something? Well, because you have to. No, and there's a rationale behind it. And, ever so often in interviewing people, I come across people who just don't get the basics because they've been focused strictly on the do, right? Oh, this is how I configure, Lisp or VXLAN, and this is it. But it's, the nuts and bolts of it, a lot of people are lacking. And I think that's just an interesting kind of dynamic as to, where things are going with the way people study today.
And that's actually, Rick, you're right. That separates true engineering from what we call meta engineering. It's like knowing exactly the why, or why we are deploying that technology and for what purpose, and why it is designed that way, and why it's being integrated in that way. Because you will be able to know the how for a specific implementation of that technology from a specific vendor. And that specific how is changing all the time. You abstract the how. You started with a CLI, you started with a low-level implementation, and you abstract, and the how is the same. It gets just easier with abstraction. But the why is what separates real engineering from just knowing how CLI works or how GUI syntax works, or how GUI works. That's
right.
it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would put somebody who understands the why up against somebody that knows the how or the do. And you could, somebody who understands the why and understands the overall architecture of the concept itself and the engineering aspects of the concept, you don't need to know every command line and memorize rote memorization of how to how to do the command line, because that's not the useful part. The useful part is the how and the why, and how does it interact, and why would you do it? Because you can open the book and find the syntax, or you can find the step-by-step instructions in Cisco documentation on how to do something. So
it's knowing that you've got to do that thing, isn't it?
But don't you know if you're learning to do an exam or learning to do a job, which are two slightly different things, really? So you might have to learn the how to pass the exam, but the why, you're absolutely right, is really important in the job, because you can read the how as you go. I spend all day on Google. Ask me a question and you think I'm the expert, and trust me, there's two screens going and one of them's Google going, I'll give us a bit of a reminder. And then it's like the brain cell is inspired and you're off.
Yeah, but isn't it that's the ideal mix, right? Not just knowing the how, but really knowing the why as well. What's the rationale behind what you're trying to do?
Certainly for mid to higher level jobs. Yeah.
I think you run into that in every profession, right? Because think about this. I mean, I've known all you guys for a long time, and I know at least some of you guys are some of the brightest people I've ever communicated with. Some.
I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask which ones.
Can you narrow me saying that?
Taken.
But you take other people,
shallow pool though,
and you put other people in the same, group or form, and they see smart, but they don't understand how to get to that perspective, right? They become what you guys are alluding to, cut and paste guys that know how to do but don't know why, right? And and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to even make this recording is, it's a lot of work. I mean, I have a model where at least 6 days a week I'm studying an hour a day. That could be I'm reading for an hour. That could mean I'm trying to learn something new. But every day I have to learn something new to carry on to the next day, right? This month it just happens to be machine learning in Python. Next month hopefully it's JavaScript. But I try to carry it on, and it's not something where I just automatically show up and I think I know something. I actually spend time listening to you guys and say, wait, I don't know that. Let me go ahead and add it to my list, and I put in time to study. And talking to some of you guys as well, I see you guys do the same thing, and that's that's how you advance and not become one of these cut and paste guys. But it takes work. It's not just easy. Right, so
you've covered a few things there. You've covered experience, right? The actual doing to get to the point where you understand, how to historically from your own experience how to do stuff. You've covered having a group of people around you, of peers who you can bounce ideas off, you can ask questions of, and that sort of thing. This is the point, right? I like the way that the IE has changed, for example, to include now an element of design in the lab, because it gives you that opportunity to test someone on the why before they then go and do the how, which was never there before, right? It was always you go in, you're told what to do, and you have to go away and know how to do 90% of it, and then know where to look to look up the 10% that you don't know how to do. But you're told what you've got to achieve as a result. What the changes mean is that, of course, you now have to know why you're doing that, because you have to do the design bit up front before you even start doing the, being let loose on
Exactly.
configuration. And I think
Exactly.
that's a huge difference. I think that's a huge step forward. And can only be.
I think
I like to think that that's taken from my favorite certification, the CCDA, but maybe not.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. I think it's good in the sense that now that's being part of the scoring, right? But I mean, if you think about it, I look at when you sat down and you started reading your lab scenario, right? You had to come up with a plan to how to attack that, because you only had 8 hours, right, to do it in. And in the real world, that could have been a project that took much longer, right? So you had to design your plan. I think what's different now is there's a score associated with it, and there's a focus on it, right?
I think and again, I think it was probably different between different tracks, right? So certainly when I did it's funny, I always talk about my routing and switching, and the one when I did it, it's always easier than what everyone else did. I'm sure it's just like, there was none of this thing of doing tickets and all that sort of stuff. There was none of that. The troubleshooting was dead straightforward. It was on one day, not 2 days. All of those things in my head, it's always a lot simpler,
Right.
because it was laid out very strictly. This is your topology you're working with. These are the scenarios you're trying to achieve, and all you really had to know. I mean, yes, you had to sort of have the broader understanding, but it was how do I configure the stuff to make this work the way that it's requested to work here? That's what it was.
And the trick is to train yourself in a more complex situations, more complex architecture, more complex challenges, and whether you have the environment to practice that, or you enforce yourself to go into a more complex scenarios and train yourself in. And naturally, when you go to the CCIE lab exam, you will see that it definitely will be less complex, that you enforce yourself to learn and to experiment. And that's a trick I found very useful when I used to study, when I studied my previous CCIE, and I exposed myself to more complex situations, a more tweaked many scenarios we found in workbooks, or we found it in different study guides, and trying to understand more the why aspect more than the how aspect, why I am doing this, and why the technology is built that way, why the integration is limited, or maybe the integration is more what capabilities as well, what if I extend that, what I will get.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely breaking things and trying to fix it as well. So
when I redistribute this into there, why it looks like this and not like the way I would expect it to, because blah blah blah. Exactly that. It's that next level of detail, isn't it? That you just go beyond. Yeah. I've had two colleagues of mine have recently passed second and third attempts at their labs, and they'll tell you exactly what you just said, that by pushing way beyond where they think the mark is, that gets them to the right place, so that the stuff that they 80% of the stuff they can just walk in and do without even thinking about it, and so the only thing they have to be concerned about is that last 20% about, that's the stuff I have to concentrate and think about when I'm actually in the lab, because the rest is just muscle memory almost about, I can just configure that stuff and away I go. So it's a combination of things, isn't it?
It's no matter. I mean, we're talking about there's life study, and then there's studying for the exam, right? But there's one thing that you have to have for both, and it's passion. Passion,
totally.
And passion is what's going to take you past, just learning what you just need to know, right? So just keep that in mind. I mean, if you're studying something or trying to learn something that you have no passion for, you're not going to be successful.
Go learn something else.
It's going to be a chore, isn't it?
Yeah.